for so many years.
Absolutely. This is a population that was living under extreme violence for years and years and years. And to now have that removed from the picture, I mean, for many people, that's worth the price of unjust arrests or of having the military on the streets. And when you look at what Bukele has done, it really goes way beyond the state of emergency. His party replaced Supreme Court judges, who then reinterpreted the country's constitution to allow him to run for re-election. Legal scholars say this is explicitly banned in the Constitution, but he did it anyway. And so people inside the country and outside are looking at what Bukele's doing and saying this is chipping away at the foundations of democracy. They're wondering how democratic is the country anymore. But when you ask people who lived in communities that were really kind of war zones in the past, they sound a lot like Irma.
And what was Bukele's response to the accusations that he might be tugging the country away from democracy, that the system of democracy in El Salvador was in danger under him?
Well, right after I talked to Irma, I went to the residence of the vice president, Felix Ulloa. He's a 72-year-old politician. He's someone who's been in this world for a long time, and I wanted to ask him about these criticisms. And we sat down, and the first thing we talked about were cases like Irma's. Alguna vez usted me comentó que los inocentes, how the government justifies sweeping up so many people that are not gang members. What he said was, we're in a war, and in a war, there's collateral damage. There's a margin of error. So he's acknowledging that mistakes have been made, essentially, but saying this is the price of something that is changing the country.
No lo veo como una posibilidad de que salga libre en su momento cuando se demuestre la inocencia.
And he's saying, look, the innocent people will eventually be released. The government has released 7,000 people from jails, but human rights groups say thousands more remain behind bars and are not gang members. And when I asked him about the charge that his government was undermining democracy, he told me something pretty remarkable. What he said was, what democracy?
O sea, cuando dice, están desmontando la institución democrática. ¿Cuáles?
What democracy did we have in this country that left us with tens of thousands of dead, that just served to benefit corrupt politicians? That's the democracy you're so concerned about?
Respuesta a esta gente dice, se está desmantelando la democracia.
He said, to the people that say that we are dismantling democracy,
La respuesta es sí.
I say yes.
No la estamos desmantelando, la estamos eliminando, la estamos sustituyendo por algo nuevo, porque eso era podrido, eso era...
We're not dismantling it, he said. We are eliminating it. He said the system that existed before was rotten, corrupt, and bloody.
Félix Ulloa ha dicho que están sustituyendo la democracia por algo nuevo. ¿Podría decirme qué es ese algo nuevo?
No sé si dijo eso.
New York Times.
And Bukele was asked about these comments in a news conference on Sunday, shortly before he claimed a resounding victory in the election. The votes are still being counted, but his win looked decisive. And he said,
Nosotros no estamos sustituyendo la democracia, porque El Salvador jamás tuvo democracia.
We're not eliminating democracy because El Salvador has never had democracy.
Esta es la primera vez en la historia que El Salvador tiene democracia.
He said this is the first time the country has ever had democracy.
Okay, which is not actually true because obviously they've had elections. So what's he talking about? Like, what does he mean there?
I think it really comes down to how this government defines democracy. Critics point out that there are really no checks on his power, nothing stopping him from doing whatever he wants in the country. But he says, look, this is the will of the people. We have popular support, we won re-election, and when you ask people on the streets, people will say, look, these are the results we have been craving. This security situation for us is priceless. And it's not just in El Salvador that he has this appeal. Bukele has become a model across the region, a reference point. You have politicians in Honduras, the Dominican Republic, Ecuador, Colombia, folks promising to emulate his model and in some cases putting pieces of it to work in their own countries.
Which makes me wonder, Natalie, how is El Salvador being seen by the U.S. right now? I mean, I imagine, one fewer democracy in its backyard is probably not a great thing. Is the Biden administration talking about this?
I mean, in the beginning of Bukele's term, the Biden administration was very vocal, pushing back on some of what was seen as attacks on democracy. But over the last year or so, not so much. Part of the issue here is that the security situation, analysts say, has contributed to a real drop in illegal migration from El Salvador, which is something that the Biden administration cares about a lot, right? You have fewer Salvadorans going to the U.S. border. That's a factor. And I think there's a broader understanding that, look, people are voting for this, so what is it going to look like if we start criticizing it from the outside? I mean, at the same time, there are people, former officials, who are telling me we are enabling a one-man authoritarian state to develop in this region.
And this leads to the broader point, right? Which is, it's true that people did vote for him. He is popularly elected. People are choosing him because they're so glad to feel safe, even if they're living in a police state. But I guess the question is, what happens when they have a different thing they want to solve for at the ballot box?
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a really big question, Sabrina, and I don't think anybody knows the answer, but the fear, especially among critics of Bukele, is that by the time that people become satisfied with safety, and then maybe have some dissatisfactions with other things, what happens when people start to get frustrated with the lack of job opportunities? Or maybe they grow tired of a situation in which all these people are being arrested, or maybe they grow tired of the military being on the streets. The fear is, by that point, there won't be any avenues for real dissent. How will people really be able to exercise their opposition to a government that maybe they're not so happy with?
Right. It'll be too late.
That's the fear.
Natalie, thank you.
Thanks, Sabrina.
We'll be right back. Have you heard of the Aruba effect? Well, if you haven't, it's the rejuvenating feeling you get after a visit to this sunny island. Once you've set foot on its white sand beaches, dove deep beneath its crystal clear waters, chatted it up with friendly locals, and basked in the warmth of the tropical sun, you'll leave in a happier state of mind. That's what a journey to Aruba is all about. Bring your family, friends, or even just yourself on a renewing getaway to an island paradise that'll leave you feeling your best. You'll forget your troubles. Just don't forget your sunscreen. Experience the magic of the Caribbean by visiting Aruba.com. That's Aruba.com. Here's what else you should know today. On Tuesday.
On this vote, the yeas are 214 and the nays are 216. The resolution is not adopted.
In a stunning defeat for House Republicans and their leader, Speaker Mike Johnson, the chamber rejected impeachment charges against Alejandro Mayorkas, the Homeland Security Secretary. The vote failed after a small group of Republicans broke with their party and refused to support what amounted to a partisan indictment of President Biden's immigration policies. The rejection was especially embarrassing for Johnson,
who had expressed confidence that it would pass, and because Republicans had been promising the impeachment for more than a year. And a federal appeals court rejected Donald Trump's claim of immunity in the case of his attempts to overturn the 2020 election. A three-judge panel in the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit ruled unanimously that Trump must go on trial, marking an important moment in American jurisprudence, as the first time an appeals court had ever answered the question of whether former presidents can escape being held criminally accountable for things they did in office. Today's episode was produced by Carlos Prieto, Claire Tennisketter, and Will Reed. It was edited by Lexi Diao and Michael Benoit, with research help from Susan Lee. Contains original music by Rowan Unisto, Marian Lozano, Dan Powell, and Diane Wong, and was engineered by Chris Wood. Our theme music is by Jim Bunberg and Ben Landsberg of Wonderly. That's it for the daily. I'm Serena Tubbs. See you tomorrow.
We make USAA insurance for veterans like James.
Additional parking. Wow, there's a whole parking lot back here. Mm-hmm.